Welcome back, guys, to Blackout Tales. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about camping in the Appalachian wilderness. Get comfortable because after this, you might just think twice before camping in those woods again. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share. Thank you all. Now let's begin. This happened a couple years ago, early spring. My cousin Sarah invited me on a camping trip with her and two of her friends, Jessica and Michelle. Just a quick weekend out in the Appalachian foothills, near the edge of Kentucky where it borders West Virginia. I'd been out that way before, but never this deep. We were way past the usual trails up near the old ridge lines where everything feels older and quieter. Sarah had found the spot through someone she worked with. Apparently some half-forgotten clearing with an old fire ring left over from the days when forest crews used to bivouac out there. We packed light tents, a couple coolers, a speaker, and whatever gear Michelle had borrowed from her dad's basement. It was all mismatched and smelled faintly of motor oil, but it worked. We hiked in late Friday morning, picking our way up a faded trail past an abandoned feeder road. That was more ditch than path by then. Took us around 4 hours to reach the spot. Nothing dramatic, just a flat clearing scattered with pine needles, mossy stones, and a collapsed log or two. But it had that feeling like we were standing somewhere nobody had touched in a long time. You could tell the trees hadn't been cut in decades. The air felt still in a way that made your voice sound louder than it should. That first night was exactly what we wanted. Sarah got a fire going. We cooked a can of chili and passed around this horrendous apple moonshine she'd liberated from her uncle's pantry. We all pretended it didn't taste like regret and lighter fluid. Stupid jokes, dumb stories. One of those nights where the firelight makes you feel safe without really knowing why. I crawled into my tent just after midnight. Cold, but manageable. I remember thinking how loud the crickets were, constant, like static on an untuned TV. What woke me up was the silence. Not just quiet, dead still. No wind, no bugs, no crunch of settling branches. It was like the whole forest hit mute. I kept my eyes shut for a second, thinking maybe it was just my brain readjusting after sleep. Then I heard it. A dragging sound, long and slow. Something scraping across dirt. No rhythm, just this irregular pull. Then stop, then pull again. It stopped right outside my tent. I didn't move, not even a breath. I just lay there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I didn't unzip the flap. I didn't call out. I just waited, listening. But the sound never came back. Eventually I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is morning light leaking through the tent walls. I did mention it at breakfast. Just figured it was an animal, or maybe one of the others had gotten up and accidentally kicked something. When we were packing up later, though, I saw this mark in the dirt. Just one. A long, shallow gouge looked like something had been pulled through the clearing. It started by the old fire ring and ended maybe 4 feet from where my tent had been. No boot prints, no tracks. Just a single broken line in the dirt. The second night felt different before it even got dark. Sarah kept saying she felt weird, kind of lightheaded. Michelle was shivering even though it wasn't cold like the night before. We didn't drink that night. Didn't really joke around much either. Just sat around the fire, talking low like we were trying not to wake something. At some point around 10, the speaker started acting up, not just cutting in and out, skipping, like someone was hitting play and pause over and over. It sat untouched on the ground, blinking. We all just stared at it until Sarah reached over and shut it off without saying anything. Michelle went to bed early, and Sarah followed, not long after. I stayed up, poking at the coals and trying to talk myself out of being on edge. The crickets were back, but they didn't sound right. Too many sudden pauses, and then these weird, synchronized stops, like someone was flipping a switch off and on. I stood up, stretched, and had just turned toward my tent when I heard it. A cough. It came from just past the tree line, maybe 15 feet beyond the edge of the fire's glow. Not deep, more like someone clearing their throat. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, human. Then I called out, "Hello?" No response. I grabbed the flashlight, stepped up to the edge of the clearing, and scanned the trees. The beam hit nothing but bark and empty branches. I didn't go past the perimeter, just stood there a bit, then turned and zipped myself into the tent like a kid hiding under the blankets. Next morning, I casually asked Sarah if she'd heard anything weird during the night. She gave me this look and said she thought she'd heard low voices like a muffled conversation somewhere nearby. Figured it was me and Michelle talking, but Michelle swore she'd been asleep the whole time. We all just kind of sat there after that. Quiet. No one said what we were thinking, but it was clear none of us were comfortable staying another night. We decided to hike out that evening. Yeah, it'd be rough in the dark, but nobody wanted to wake up there again. We packed everything, doused the fire, and waited for the last coals to cool before scattering the ring. Sarah went to grab her last bag from near the trees. That's when it happened again. The dragging. Not behind us this time, but across the clearing from the far side. Loud. Deliberate. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. We all turned toward the sound instantly. There was nothing to see, just the usual trees and dirt, but the sound was real. It felt too close and too slow to mistake. Michelle grabbed her pack without a word and started walking. Fast. Sarah and I fell in behind her, not bothering to scatter the firestones or double-check the site. We didn't stop. We were maybe halfway back to the old logging road, legs sore and boots covered in mud, when we saw it. Something up ahead, just off the trail. At first, it looked like a person standing there with their back to us. But as we got closer, we realized it wasn't upright at all. It was something long, kind of folded up in the brush, stretched between two trees in this weird, slumped angle, like it had been dragged and left there. Sarah lifted her phone and flicked on the flashlight. The beam caught something pale and smooth. It was a tarp, old, stained, and bunched up like someone had tried to pull it further but gave up. The end of it was tangled in low branches. For a second, none of us said anything, none of us touched it. We gave it a wide berth, staying in each other's line of sight the whole way back. No more talking until we hit the truck. Once the gravel road came into view, I felt my jaw unclench for the first time in hours. It wasn't until we were halfway back to town that Michelle finally said what we'd all been thinking. I don't think we were supposed to be there. A week later, Sarah sent me a screenshot. Someone in a local missing persons group had posted a photo of something a hunter found near the same stretch of woods. It looked like a makeshift campsite, probably used in the last few days. There were scraps of food wrappers, a hoodie, and this old portable radio sitting in the dirt. But behind it, almost out of frame, was a blurry blue tent. It looked just like the one Michelle used. That was it. We swear we never talked about it anymore. My cousin Nathan had been bugging me for years to join him on one of his real backpacking trips. I'd spent too many weekends sinking into the same old online rabbit holes, scrolling through dead message boards, half reading weird survival stories, and so-called true encounters with things people couldn't explain. Nathan picked the spot. Said it was one of his favorites, deep in the Appalachian backcountry, not even on most maps. We had to drive about 3 hours past anything resembling a town. Then another hour down a dirt road that got steadily more suspicious the farther we went. We loaded up our packs and started hiking around midday. The trail, if you could call it that, was barely visible. Just a narrow impression weaving through brush and roots, mostly climbing. Nathan was in his element, moving confidently like he knew every bend, while I trailed behind, trying not to twist my ankle. We passed a couple of those old metal trail markers nailed to trees, but most were rusted or barely visible, covered in moss or split by bark. After about 5 miles, we came to a clearing, a decent spot, quiet, ringed with tall hemlocks that blocked some of the wind. There was a blackened fire ring in the center, and a small rotting pile of firewood nearby. Someone had definitely camped there recently. You could see where pine needles had been brushed aside and bits of burnt foil were still caught in the ashes. But there was no sign of whoever it was. We set up under the trees and got a small fire going. Nathan cooked beans and rice on his camp stove while I tried to get warm. It dropped fast once the sun dipped behind the ridge line. That first night was uneventful. A couple owl calls, maybe a fox yipping somewhere out in the dark, but nothing that set off any alarms. I think we were both asleep by 10. I woke up before dawn, probably 5 in the morning, to the sound of movement outside. At first I thought it was Nathan getting up to pee, but then I realized the sound wasn't close. It wasn't a person shuffling around near the tent. It was more like something pacing, not heavy, not crashing around, just slow, measured crunching. I sat up and listened. Nathan was still zipped into his sleeping bag next to me, breathing slow and steady, definitely asleep. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. It was still dark and I couldn't see anything. But the sound stopped, like it knew I was listening. And then I heard something else. A dragging sound. Slow, steady, like something heavy was being pulled through the leaves. It moved in a wide arc, just one big loop around the camp. And then silence. No rustling, no footsteps. Just dead quiet. I lay back down and stayed still. I don't know why I didn't wake Nathan. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was that weird part of your brain that tells you not to overreact. Especially when you're out in the woods, and you're supposed to act like everything's normal. I just told myself it was a deer or something. I tried to believe that. Later that morning, we packed up our bags and hiked up to a nearby ridge Nathan wanted to show me. The view was great. Tree-covered hills rolling out in every direction like waves. But the whole time I kept thinking about the dragging. I didn't bring it up. It felt dumb to say out loud. On the way back to camp, I spotted something maybe 30 feet off the trail. An old trail marker, half buried in bark. The paint almost gone. Faded red, not like the ones we'd passed earlier. It looked older, forgotten. I pointed it out, thinking maybe Nathan would find it interesting. He just glanced at it and said, "Yeah, there are 1,000 dead trails out here. People used to log all through this range." That was it. No curiosity, no hesitation. Back at camp, something was off. Our food bags had been taken down from the bear line and placed on the ground. Not torn open, not rummaged through, just moved, set there carefully. They were still tied closed. No missing items, no teeth marks or scratches, just sitting there like someone had looked inside and decided to leave it all. Nathan assumed I'd hung them wrong, and they fell, but I know they didn't. I double-checked the knots. That's not something I screw up. That night, the temperature dropped again, and we built the fire high. We sat close, not talking much. Around 10, I saw something flicker out in the trees, like a flashlight beam. Just a quick flash between two trunks, maybe 20 yards out. I looked at Nathan. He'd seen it too. "Think someone's out there?" I asked. He didn't answer, just kept looking into the trees. A few minutes passed, then we heard a voice. It was soft, almost too quiet to catch. Just a few syllables at a time, repeating over and over. Female maybe, but the tone was strange, flat. No emotion, no urgency, like someone practicing a word they didn't understand. Nathan stood up and shouted, "Hello?" No response. Then the dragging sound again. Much closer this time. I could feel the weight of it, like whatever it wasn't in a hurry. We didn't wait. We threw dirt over the fire and crawled into the tent. No lights, no talking, just both of us sitting there, not even bothering with the sleeping bags. We each had a knife out and a can of bear spray. I held mine so tight my hand went numb. The dragging came right behind the tent. I could hear the individual leaves shifting, the slow scrape of weight moving through the brush. Then footsteps. Clear, human-like footsteps. 1, 2, 3, all the way around us in a wide circle, and then it stopped. We didn't sleep at all. Every small noise outside had me holding my breath. The air in the tent felt heavy, like we were waiting for something to come through the wall. At first light, we tore everything down in minutes. No breakfast, no coffee, just packed and left. About a mile down the trail, Nathan stopped suddenly. "Shit," he said, "my hatchet. I told him to leave it. He wouldn't." So he dropped his pack and jogged back toward camp. I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. I started walking back toward camp, calling his name. Nothing. Then I saw him. He was walking fast, eyes wide, no pack, no hatchet, just him, breathing hard. When I asked what happened, he didn't say a word, just walked past me like I wasn't even there. It wasn't until we were almost back to the car that he finally spoke. "We don't talk about this," he said. I asked him again what he saw, what happened. He hesitated, then said the camp looked the same as we'd left it, except for two things. The fire pit had been restacked perfectly. Fresh wood, dry kindling, like someone had prepared it to light again. And inside the tent, carved into the nylon wall, was his full name. Underneath it, one word: stay. We got in the car and drove in silence. We didn't talk until we hit pavement. That was 3 years ago. Nathan hasn't been camping since. He sold all his gear the following week. Tent, stove, boots, everything. Won't even go near the woods. Last month, I stumbled across a thread on a backwoods hiking forum. People were talking about strange encounters in the Appalachians. One post mentioned a dead zone near a ridge, said gear gets reorganized, campers hear movement at night, someone circling their tent, a voice repeating itself in the dark. No one had replied. The person who posted it, their username was Stay23. I was 19 when it happened. That summer, 3 of my friends and I decided to go off-grid for a while. We planned out 5 days of backpacking in this barely documented patch of forest near Luray, Virginia. Ryan was the gear guy. He brought the tent, the stove, and most of the tools. Mark had this old printed topo map and handled the route planning. Nick, the last in our group, packed the med kit and emergency gear. I was in charge of the food. It worked. We like to joke that we were a disaster waiting to happen, but somehow our group dynamics balanced out. We parked at the end of this dirt road that had more grass than gravel, locked our phones in the glove box, and double-checked everything before heading out. It felt good in a weirdly pure way, walking into the woods with everything we needed strapped to our backs. No service, no schedule, just trees and time. The first couple of days were honestly kind of perfect. The weather held up warm in the day, cool at night. The forest was thick but not hard to move through. We followed a stream most of the way, making it easy to refill our bottles and stay on course. No one talked much about it, but I think we were all relieved it didn't feel like a survival show episode. It felt almost easy. On the second day, late afternoon, we stumbled across a stretch that looked like something out of a postcard. The land dipped into this little sloped clearing with big mossy rocks and flat patches of pine needles. A narrow creek ran through it, just deep enough to soak your feet. It felt untouched, like no one had walked through in years. Ryan took one look and said, "We should stay there 2 nights, rest up, maybe fish." Everyone agreed. We got camp set up, cooked dinner, and sat around the fire until it got dark enough to matter. At some point, I grabbed the pot and headed down to the creek to wash off the last bits of our pasta mess. It was maybe 30 yards from camp, just far enough to feel alone. I was crouched by the water, scrubbing at the edges, when I heard something behind me. Just a small crunch, like a foot pressing lightly into dry leaves. I turned fast, thinking Nick had followed me down, but there was no one there. Just trees and shadows. I stood still for a bit, listening, nothing, no footsteps, no breathing, not even birds. It was like the forest had paused. When I turned back to the creek, the pot was gone. Gone. I blinked a few times, trying to convince myself I was just tired and looking in the wrong spot. I even patted the ground around me like it had fallen into a weird crack between the rocks, but it hadn't clattered, hadn't rolled. It was just not there anymore. I climbed back up to camp, trying to stay calm, figuring I'd probably left it further up the slope without realizing. Ryan and Mark were still by the fire, roasting the last marshmallows. I asked if either of them had come down to the creek. They both looked at me like I was nuts. "You serious?" Ryan asked. "Why would we?" I told them the pot was gone, not misplaced, not lost, just disappeared. They laughed at first, then stopped when I didn't laugh back. Nick came out of the tent rubbing his eyes and joined the search. We spent maybe 40 minutes looking. We checked every spot, under logs, around the rocks, even in the trees, in case some animal had dragged it. Nothing. Eventually we gave up. I was frustrated, but it was late and the fire was dying. We figured we'd deal with it in the morning, maybe fashion something out of foil if we had to. That night I woke up cold. Not the usual slipped off the sleeping pad kind of cold, but bone deep, freezing. My bag was zipped all the way up, but I was still shaking. I sat up slowly, thinking maybe the tent had torn or shifted. Something felt wrong. The tent didn't feel like it was in the same position. That was the first thing. I unzipped the flap and stuck my head out. It was dark, pitch black. No firelight, no moon, just the thick kind of dark that swallows your depth perception. But I knew immediately the tent had turned. We'd set it up facing the creek. Now the flap opened toward the opposite direction, toward the woods. And it hadn't just spun in place. Everything around it had shifted. My boots were sitting a few feet away from where I'd left them. Ryan's backpack had been flipped upside down, one of the straps torn loose. The bear bag, the one we'd hung between two trees 10 feet off the ground, was missing, just gone. The rope was still hanging there like nothing had touched it. I woke the others. Ryan came out first, groggy and annoyed. But once he looked around, his mood changed. Nick looked at the gear, then at us, and didn't say anything. We talked through the possibilities. A person? Maybe, but none of us had heard anything, no voices, no lights, no breaking branches. Just silence. We packed up at first light and hiked out fast. No one said much, but you could feel the tension. We moved until we found a rocky ridge that opened up a bit less tree cover, more sky. It felt safer in a way. That night it started to rain. We cooked on a flat stone under the tarp, trying to get back to normal. The mood lightened for a bit until Mark looked up and said, "Didn't we hang 4 bags?" There were only 3. Mine was gone this time. Rice, trail mix, jerky, all of it. Mark tried to play it off. Said I probably left it at the last camp in the rush. I knew I hadn't. I remember clipping it in myself. No one wanted to argue, but we all knew what it meant. That night I barely slept. Every time a branch creaked or the tarp shifted in the wind, I found myself holding my breath. At one point I heard something circling the edge of our camp. Not fast, just slow, deliberate steps through the brush. By the 4th night, Ryan suggested we start keeping watch. 1-hour shifts. Mark took first. I had second. He woke me up around 1, his face pale and drawn. He said he'd heard a voice somewhere down the slope, just out of sight. It only said one word, whispered real slow, closer. He didn't joke. He didn't smile. He just handed me the flashlight and went straight into his sleeping bag. I sat there, back against a rock watching the woods. Everything was quiet again, still. At some point I caught a shape out of the corner of my eye. Standing between 2 trees. Tall, still not moving. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't say anything in the morning, just told them the night was quiet. We broke camp early and decided to head back a day ahead of schedule. No one protested. About 2 hours from the trailhead, Ryan stopped suddenly, his foot frozen mid-step. He was staring off to the right where a narrow tree stood just off the path. There was something nailed to it. The pot. Hung at eye level, dead center, polished, clean. Not a speck of soot, like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. No one walked closer. No one touched it. We just kept walking. Back at the car, all 4 doors were unlocked. But nothing was missing. Not the phones, not the wallets, not even the loose change in the cup holder. And that was the last time I ever went camping. We'd picked a spot down near a narrow bend of Deep Creek out past the gravel service roads in the Pisgah National Forest. We were a good 12 or 13 miles from the nearest ranger station, way beyond cell range. There were 3 of us, me, my cousin Amanda, and her fiancé Matthew. Amanda and I grew up hiking those mountains. We'd done this stretch before, different loops over the years, but always the same general area. We bushwhacked, slept in hammocks during thunderstorms, got turned around and figured it out. This stuff never rattled us. Matthew, though, this was his first time out in real backcountry. No amenities, no campground. He'd done day hikes, sure, and I think he'd stayed in a cabin once with his friends. But nothing like this. No trail markers beyond the entry, no bathrooms, just rocks, trees, and the sound of whatever was nearby. He asked a lot of questions, made jokes about bears, kept triple-checking his gear even though Amanda had packed half his stuff. The first night felt normal. Honestly, it was one of the smoother setups we've done. We pitched tents close to a flat patch, just above the creek's bend, maybe 20 yards from the waterline. The trees around there grow close but not dense, so you get decent visibility without feeling exposed. We made a good fire, cooked some instant noodles, passed around a flask, and just let the night settle. Matthew kept remarking how quiet it was. Not in a scared way, just kind of impressed. It's weird, he said, how once the fire dies down, it's like the whole place exhales. That stuck with me. Not in a dramatic way, just the phrasing. By the second night, I noticed he kept bringing it up. The quiet. But this time he didn't sound impressed anymore. More puzzled. Still no bugs, he said, looking up from the fire. Seriously, I haven't heard a single buzz. No mosquitoes, no moths hitting the tent, nothing. Amanda rolled her eyes and said, "Complain when you do get bit." But I got what he meant. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was flat, hollow. Even out there you should hear something, especially by water. Frogs, crickets, owls. But there was nothing. Not even wind. We laughed it off again, but there was this undercurrent now, like a thin wire pulling tighter. That night something woke me up. I don't know what time it was. Late, definitely after midnight. I didn't hear anything, didn't dream anything weird. I just came awake, like a switch flipped. I lay there for a while, eyes open in the dark, waiting for something to tell me why I was up. That's when I noticed the sound. Water. Not the creek, not the low gurgle we'd fallen asleep to. This was different, sharper, closer. It sounded like a trickle at first, then steadier, like someone had turned on a faucet. Not a loud gush, just this controlled, clean stream. Way too close. It had a rhythm to it, too exact to be part of the landscape. I sat up and peeked through the tent flap. The fire had burned down to this dull red ash ring. Amanda and Matthew's tent was zipped up. His boots were still out by the fire pit. Nothing looked off. But the water noise was louder now, almost deliberate, like it was being poured just behind me. I stepped out, didn't see anything. The creek was still 20 yards downhill. I crouched near the tent and held my breath. The sound didn't stop, it didn't change. It was like it didn't care I was listening. Eventually I gave up trying to find it. I crawled back in and pulled the sleeping bag tighter. The noise followed me for a while, into sleep, I think. It stayed in my head like tinnitus, just looping. The next morning nobody said much. I didn't bring it up, neither did Matthew, but around lunch, while we were boiling water, he casually said, "I think I saw something last night, like out in the trees." He didn't push it, didn't make it a big moment, just said it, then stared at the steam coming off the pot. Amanda just rolled her eyes again. "Probably a deer, or one of your imaginary owls." He smiled, sort of. But that was it. No more jokes about the quiet, no more observations. That night he built the fire higher than we usually do, kept feeding it. I told him we didn't need that much heat, and he just said, "Yeah, but I want the light." He kept glancing downhill toward the creek like something might be walking back up. It was after midnight when I heard the first zipper. His tent. I figured bathroom break. But a few seconds later I heard another zipper. Mine. From outside. I froze. My hands were under the blanket, but I could feel my palms sweating. I whispered, "Matthew?" Nothing. I sat up and looked out through the mesh. He wasn't near my tent, not anywhere in the camp circle, but then I saw him. Standing about 10 feet away, right at the edge of the clearing facing the trees. Back straight, arms at his sides, just staring. I unzipped a little more and whispered again, "Matthew, what are you doing?" He didn't move. Just lifted one hand slowly, like he was motioning me to stop. Not in a friendly way. Just a slow, firm signal like I wasn't supposed to follow. Then he took a step forward. Amanda's voice cracked through the sounds behind me. "Matthew, what the hell?" She came out barefoot, hair messy, clearly half asleep and pissed. He didn't react. Just kept walking, one foot at a time, like he wasn't the one moving. Like something was walking through him. She ran to him and grabbed his arm. That's when he turned. Fast, too fast, too fast. I still don't know how to describe his face. It was his, but it wasn't. His mouth was hanging open, not surprised, just slack, like his jaw didn't belong there. His eyes were wide, too wide, and they didn't focus. Not on her, not on anything. He mumbled something, a low, wet syllable. No words, just noise. Amanda shook him hard. For a second he blinked, and then he dropped, like a puppet with the strings cut. We dragged him back into the tent. He didn't resist, he just sort of melted into the sleeping bag, didn't say anything, didn't move, out cold. He slept through the rest of the night. In the morning he acted like nothing had happened. Thought we were joking, said we must have dreamed it or misunderstood. Amanda didn't argue. She just handed him her phone. She'd taken a few pictures trying to light the way with her screen when she'd run after him. One of them showed him clear as day, from behind and just over his shoulder, half invisible behind the trees. There was something else. It looked like skin, human-shaped, but all wrong. Stretched between two trunks, thin and veined like it had been peeled off and hung to dry. No head, no face, just folds, like it had collapsed in on itself and was trying to hold form. We didn't pack slowly, no breakfast, no idle talk. By 10 we were hiking out. But something was wrong with the trail. Landmarks were out of order. First we passed that split boulder we saw on the first day, then the crooked birch with the rope swing, which we should have hit hours ago. Amanda checked the topo map 3 times before saying, "This doesn't make sense. We've been here already. We weren't just lost, we were looping on a marked trail." Matthew stopped walking, didn't say anything at first. Then he looked up the hill and whispered, "I think we're being followed." I asked him why he thought that, but he just kept staring toward the tree line. We stood still, listening. That's when I saw it. A hand. A hand. Just the fingers, slowly curling around a tree trunk, maybe 30 feet up the slope. Not normal fingers. Too long, too many joints. Each one moved like it had its own weight, like it wasn't using bones. Matthew didn't even look at me, just said, "It's copying us." We didn't speak again, just ran. We cut straight through the trees, pushing past limbs, climbing over rocks, smashing through underbrush. I don't remember how long we ran. It felt endless. Then suddenly gravel, the sound of a car. We burst out of the woods like animals, breathless, covered in burrs and mud. Amanda flagged down the first pickup that passed. The guy didn't ask many questions, just drove. They moved out of state within the month. Matthew barely slept for weeks. Told Amanda he kept hearing water dripping in the walls. As for me, I went back once, only to the edge, just to look. The creek was there, same bend, same moss-covered rocks, same trees. But the trail? Gone. My friend Jason came up with this plan for a weekend hike along a stretch of the Appalachian Trail. His uncle owned some property way out in the woods, 3 hours from where we lived in Tennessee, and the land backed right up to the forest. We could park the truck on his uncle's land and hike in from there. It sounded like a decent way to get out of town and unplug for a couple days. I'd done my fair share of camping, my dad hunts, so I grew up tagging along on trips. I wasn't new to tents, fire starting, or hearing coyotes in the distance. But this would be my first time out that far without other people nearby. No campground bathrooms or marked plots. Just us and the trail. There were 3 of us going, me, Jason, and our friend Eric. We packed light, just enough to get by. Sleeping bags, trail food, water filters, a camp stove. Jason had an old map his uncle gave him with some hand-drawn trails and landmarks. We left early Friday morning, aiming to cover about 6 miles before nightfall. Nothing too intense. The weather looked good, and while cell service dropped in and out, we had backup battery packs and a compass if we really needed it. That first day was fine. Long, sweaty, full of blisters and swatting at bugs, but overall fine. We made decent time. Around 3 in the afternoon, we hit the 5-mile mark and started looking for a place to set up. Jason remembered a spot from a hike he did once with his uncle, a clearing with an old stone chimney standing by itself. No house or anything, just the chimney left behind. Sounded cool, and he said it wasn't much further. We found it after another half hour. There it was. This tall, crumbling stone chimney, just sitting alone in a clearing like it was waiting for someone to finish building the house around it. It looked like it had been there forever. Moss along the sides, cracks running through the stone, nothing around it but trees and weeds. The strangest part was how intact it was. Everything else, the structure, the foundation, completely gone. We pitched our tents a little ways back and got a fire going before it got too dark to matter. It was quiet out there, not in a spooky way, just in that deep woods kind of way. No cars, no people, just birds and the occasional squirrel rustling around. By 8, we were sitting around the fire passing a bag of trail mix and talking about school and summer plans. We weren't even trying to be tough guys. Just felt relaxed, like the kind of night where nothing could go wrong. Then we heard something in the woods, crunching leaves, maybe 20, 30 feet off to the side. Eric went quiet mid-sentence and turned his head. We all sat still. The sound stopped almost immediately. We kind of laughed it off. Deer, maybe. Could have been a raccoon or something bigger. Normal forest sounds. But we were all just a little more aware after that. An hour or so later, we heard it again. This time from behind us. Same type of sound. Slow, steady footsteps crunching the underbrush. Not the quick hops of a rabbit or the skittering of a raccoon. Just deliberate, careful steps. Jason stood up and called out, "Hey, we're camping here." Nothing. We listened for a while. The forest stayed quiet. After a bit, we all pretended it didn't bother us and climbed into our tents. No one said anything about it, but I think we were all running through the same thoughts. Maybe a hiker nearby or some kind of animal just passing through. I woke up sometime around 3 in the morning. My bladder was screaming at me, but I really didn't want to leave the tent. I lay there for a while trying to will myself back to sleep, but it wasn't happening. Eventually, I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The fire had burned out. The clearing was pitch black. I didn't bother with the headlamp, just turned on my phone light and shuffled about 10 feet away. That's when I heard it. This soft, rhythmic scraping sound coming from over by the chimney. I froze midstream. It was faint, but steady, like Something being dragged across the stone. Not fast, not loud, just this slow, repetitive scrape over and over. I aimed my light toward it, but couldn't see much. Just the outline of the chimney and a few twisted branches in the way. The sound stopped. And then there was something else. A whisper. Not words exactly. More like someone exhaling, trying to get my attention. Just one long, drawn-out breath coming from just beyond the chimney where the trees grew thick. My body reacted before my brain caught up. I turned around, zipped back into my tent, and lay there staring at the fabric inches from my face. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, nobody said anything. Jason and Eric acted normal. I didn't bring it up either. We just had our breakfast bars, packed our gear, and started up the ridge trail. We didn't see a single other person all day, just trees, dirt, and silence. By early evening, we were back near the same clearing. It made sense to camp there again. We knew it. We had food stashed. I didn't like the idea, but I kept my mouth shut. That second night was worse. Sometime after 1 a.m, I heard someone whispering my name through the tent wall. "Hey, you awake?" It was Eric. "Yeah," I whispered back. "Something's out there?" I sat up. "Where?" No response. I unzipped the flap and poked my head out. His tent was 5 feet away, empty. I scanned the clearing with my headlamp. Found him standing near the chimney. Just standing there facing the trees, still as a statue. When the light hit him, he turned his head. "Thought I heard someone talking," he said. I told him to come back to the tents. He did slowly. Neither of us really slept after that. Next morning, Jason looked terrible. He said he'd spent the entire night dreaming about walking. Not even walking anywhere, just the sensation of walking endlessly. Said his legs were sore, like he'd been moving the whole time. We joked he was sleep hiking, but the look on his face didn't match the joke. He looked like someone who hadn't rested at all. We packed up and decided to head back early. No one argued. About half a mile down the trail, I realized I didn't have my pocket knife. Thought I must have dropped it near the fire pit. Told them I'd jog back and grab it real quick. They didn't love the idea, but I said 10 minutes tops. I cut back through the trail, slipped into the clearing, and walked toward the fire pit. No knife. I turned toward the chimney and froze. There were footprints around it, bare, long, narrow, way too long for any of us. And they didn't go anywhere, just circled the chimney in a perfect ring over and over. And then I saw the knife. It was stuck into the chimney wall halfway up, blade first, wedged right between 2 stones, like someone had driven it in there. I hadn't been near the chimney the night before. I hadn't touched it. I backed away slowly and walked out of the clearing, eyes scanning the trees the whole way. Caught up to Jason and Eric. Didn't say anything. We made it back to the truck by early afternoon and drove home without stopping. That night I had a dream. I was back in the woods, walking. But I wasn't choosing to. My legs were just moving on their own, pulling me toward the chimney. When I woke up, my calves ached and my boots were muddy. I haven't gone camping since. I was 21 when we decided to hike the Raccoon Ridge trails. 6 days out in the Appalachians, in a patch of wilderness people mostly forget about unless they grew up near it. No resorts, no overlooks, no casual Sunday hikers. Just trees, creeks, and a whole lot of quiet. There were 5 of us, me, my older brother Eric, his girlfriend Brittany, and 2 of his college buddies, Wesley and John. We'd done smaller trips together before, but this one was supposed to be our real backpacking experience. Test our limits, get away from everything. We had decent gear, tents, food, solar chargers, GPS units. We weren't exactly surviving on moss and bugs, but once we crossed the first ridge into the Lost Cove, that's what the locals call that stretch, phones died completely. No signal, no stray bars, just the map, a compass, and Wesley swearing he remembered the route from a camping blog. By the third day, we'd covered about 14 miles. We were tired, but not wrecked. Joints stiff, feet blistered in spots, everyone moving slower, but still joking around. That night, we started looking for a place to camp earlier than usual. John wandered off the main path for a bit and came back saying he'd found a good spot near a bend in a creek. Said it looked flat and dry, plus it was quiet. That part stuck with me, how quiet it was. No buzzing, no frogs, not even the usual rustle from squirrels or birds hopping through undergrowth. The water moved, but even that sounded off, muted, like the whole place was wrapped in insulation. Eric laughed and said it was like someone had hit mute on the woods. We all chuckled, but no one really followed up on it. We set up our tents in a little horseshoe shape with the fire pit in the center, ate some salty trail food, boiled water for tea, and sat around the fire talking, everyone but John. He sat hunched a little forward, hands on his knees, just staring into the flame. He hadn't been himself all day. Slower to answer, barely touched his food, but now he just looked blank, like the fire had taken him somewhere, and he hadn't come back yet. Brittany leaned over and asked, kind of gently, "You good?" Like she already knew the answer. John didn't look at her. Just said, "Just thinking," in this strange underwater kind of voice. It sounded like him technically, but if you closed your eyes, you might have thought someone was doing a slow motion impression of him. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like each word was being selected one at a time from a list, like he didn't trust the sound of his own voice. We figured maybe he was dehydrated or just fried from hiking. Eric offered him water, but he waved it off. He went to his tent early, didn't even say goodnight. The rest of us stayed up a little longer, talking about college stories, old inside jokes, stuff like that. But I kept glancing over at John's tent. Something about it made me uneasy. The silence maybe, or how quickly he'd gone still. Around midnight we heard something. It wasn't a crunch or a snap or any of the usual nighttime noises. It was movement, smooth, slow, like something big was sliding along the brush. Not crashing through it, gliding. Eric turned on his headlamp, did a slow sweep. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and the white blur of his beam bouncing off leaves. Then came the smell. Thick, sour, like rotting leaves and meat left out in the rain. It rolled in low and heavy, like fog you couldn't see. Wesley grabbed his flashlight, circled around back where we thought the noise came from. He was gone for maybe 3 minutes. When he came back, he looked pale. "John's tent," he said, "it's open." We all stood up fast, walked over. The flap was unzipped all the way and pinned back neatly like someone had tied it that way on purpose. Inside, his sleeping bag was empty. His pack was still there, headlamp, water bottle, even his coat. The only thing missing were his boots. We called his name. Nothing. Walked to the edge of the creek, checked the nearby game trail. No sign of him, no footprints, no splashes. If he'd gone out to pee, we would have heard something, seen something. But there was nothing. We didn't want to panic. Told ourselves maybe he wandered off to clear his head and got turned around. We left a lantern on, waited, slept in shifts if you could call it that. Just before dawn, I heard something crunch. Real footsteps this time, from the wrong direction. Not the trail, not the creek, from the thick trees behind us, the direction no one had gone. It was John. He walked straight into camp, shirt torn down one side, arms scratched up like he'd crawled through bramble. His face was smudged with dirt, but his expression was calm. Too calm. He didn't say a word. Eric rushed over and said, "Where the hell did you go?" John didn't answer. He walked past all of us and sat back down by the dead fire pit like we were still mid-conversation. Wesley crouched beside him and said, "Man, what happened?" Trying not to sound scared. John blinked once, then said, flat as paper, "I wasn't supposed to come back." None of us knew what to say. Eric asked, "Come back from where?" John looked up at him real slow and said, "She's still out there." That was it. He lay down right there on the dirt. Didn't explain, didn't move, didn't even pull his coat on. The next morning he acted like nothing had happened. No memory of leaving the tent, no memory of the scratches. Laughed when we asked, thought we were messing with him. But I checked his boots while he was eating. Caked in dried mud, dark and packed in deep. But the insides, dry. No signs he'd been near the creek or stepped in anything wet. That night we camped 2 miles east, closer to the trailhead. Still in the woods, but somewhere that felt a little less watched. Just after sunset, we heard the voice. A woman, not yelling, not whispering, just calling John's name. Slow, measured, over and over. It didn't echo, it didn't move around, it was just there hanging in the trees every direction at once. Brittany started crying. Eric shouted back, thinking maybe someone was injured. But the voice didn't answer. Just kept saying John's name. Same rhythm, same tone. John froze. Didn't blink. Didn't turn his head. Like his body was still, but his ears were tuned to every syllable. After 10 minutes, the voice stopped. like a record being lifted off the turntable. We packed everything in silence, didn't even argue, just started moving. We hiked through the dark, made it 5 miles before our legs gave out, sat in a cold circle, backs against trees. No one slept. By mid-morning, we ran into a park ranger. Name tag said Maddox. First thing he asked was if we were the group camped downriver. Said someone reported distant yelling the night before. We gave him the basics, didn't dramatize, just facts. He didn't look surprised. Just nodded slowly and said, "You camped near Old Bend?" We nodded. He sighed and said, "That trail used to run through burial land." Stories go back a long way. Folks hearing voices, coming back wrong. Then he said, "They call her the Crooked Eye Woman." He didn't say much more. Just told us to stay on marked trails, avoid unlisted bends, and don't follow game paths no matter how flat they look. We ended the trip early, packed up, and drove home without a word. John slept the entire drive, mumbling in his sleep. We were 4 days into this week-long hiking loop through a quiet, out-of-the-way patch of forest in Watauga County, North Carolina. There were 6 of us, all in our mid-20s, give or take a year. None of us were pros or wilderness survival experts. We just liked camping, hiking, getting out of town. This time, we wanted something different. Off-grid. Real isolation. The trail we picked ran through a patch of land technically listed as a preserve, though I don't think it had been maintained in decades. The ranger who signed off our permit didn't even look up from her desk. Just asked if we had our own gear and a beacon. Told us we wouldn't get cell service past the 2nd mile. Said we'd likely be the only ones out there. That sounded good at the time. The trail looped through pine forest, old dirt roads that were probably used for mining 50 years ago, and 2 fire towers so rusted you couldn't get more than 3 steps up before the metal screamed under your weight. It felt like stepping back in time. There weren't markers or signage past the first day, just a worn path, barely visible through ferns and undergrowth. We were tired by the 5th day, muscle sore, feet blistered, clothing crusted with dried sweat and trail dust. But we were still in it, the kind of tired that feels earned. That night we made camp down by a narrow creek, just under a low ridge. The water barely moved. You could hear it trickle if you stood still. The air had a strange weight to it, like the silence was thicker than it should have been. No birds, no rustling, just stillness. I remember standing there brushing my teeth and realizing I hadn't seen a single animal all day, not even a squirrel. After we ate, we sat around a small fire. Everyone was too drained for real conversation. It was just the flicker of flames and the occasional clink of metal cups. Then William decided to tell one of his Appalachian ghost stories, as he called them. Stuff his grandfather used to tell him when he was a kid. He'd told us a few before, half folklore, half campfire nonsense. But that night they hit different. He talked about these old warnings from the area. Not just ghosts or monsters. Things that weren't supposed to have names. Creatures that mimicked voices. Places that shifted if you walked through them twice. He said names had power out here, and that if you said the wrong one out loud, it would find you. We all kind of laughed, but not too hard. There was a weird tension in the air that made everything stick a little harder than usual. He must have noticed, because then he said we should each make up our own scary story. Said it would confuse the spirits, like a joke spell. A reverse curse. Typical William, joking around but half believing it. So we went around the circle, one by one, making stuff up. Stories about hikers who vanished, trails that looped back to the beginning no matter how far you walked, Weird, backward-speaking people. You know the type. When it got to me, I was already in my sleeping bag, kind of drifting off near the fire. I heard someone say, "Your turn, Riven," and I sat up just enough to talk. I remember starting something about a guy who finds a cabin deep in the woods, one that shouldn't exist. That's it. That's the last thing I remember clearly. Next thing I knew, I was on my back, staring through the mesh of my tent at the stars. I was still mid-sentence. My mouth was open. The fire had burned low. I could hear myself talking, but I didn't know what I was saying. The words sounded like mine, but they didn't feel like mine. Then, without thinking, I said, "They all died. That's the end." And everything just stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody reacted. They were all just sitting there, completely still, like statues, caught mid-blink. I sat up all the way. Jamie had tears silently running down her face. Not crying, just leaking. Her hands were shaking a little. Nora was curled in on herself, fists clenched in her lap, knuckles like chalk. Even William looked sick, like he was about to throw up or pass out. I asked what was wrong. Nobody answered. Later, after we'd all gone to our tents, I whispered to Jamie. She was sharing with me that night. I told her I didn't remember what I'd said. She looked at me for a long time, then said very quietly, "You never opened your eyes." I asked again what I said. She didn't answer, just turned her back. In the morning, Nora and Emily were gone. They left a note on the back of a torn trail map. It said, "Heading back. Don't follow, that's all." They didn't take food, they didn't take the radio. Just their packs and barely enough water for a day. We stood around that note like it might explain something else if we stared long enough. Nobody had a good idea what to do. It was 2 full days back to the trailhead no matter which direction you walked. We decided to keep going forward. We figured they'd stick to the trail and make it out ahead of us, or someone would find them. We hit the emergency beacon once, just in case. No signal. The next 2 days felt wrong. Not scary, not dangerous, just wrong. No one said much. No one joked anymore. William barely looked at anyone. At night, we didn't build another fire. We just ate cold food in the dark and went to bed early, like we were afraid of drawing attention. When we finally got back to the lot, Nora and Emily's cars were still there. That kicked off the real search. Rangers, helicopters, dogs. They found the girls 6 days later, 20 miles southeast of where they should have been. Way off trail. No shoes, dehydrated, cuts all over their legs, silent. They didn't talk. Not to the Rangers, not to their parents, not to each other. We waited weeks. I half expected someone to send a group text to try to piece it together, but nothing happened until Jamie ran into Emily through a mutual friend. She asked her what happened out there. Emily didn't say much, just one thing. She said when I told that story by the fire, it wasn't random. It was like it knew her. Like I was describing things only she would have known. Childhood nightmares, places from her past, things she never told anyone, specific names. And she said the worst part wasn't the details, it was the feeling that I wasn't telling the story, that the story was telling me. I never remembered a word of it. We tried to get together once, just to talk. Jamie left early. William didn't show at all. I think we were all hoping someone else would be brave enough to say what we were all thinking. I was 27 when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. Not car camping, not a short hike from a trailhead really out there. Deep woods. I'd just quit a job I couldn't stand, and I hadn't lined up anything new yet. So I figured I'd try to shake it off in the mountains. I'd hiked in the southern Appalachians before, usually weekend stuff, nothing serious. But this time I picked a spot I'd marked a few weeks earlier using my Gaia app. No trail nearby. Just a clearing I'd found on satellite view, about 8 miles from the road, northwest of a town called Blue Ridge, Georgia. Middle of nowhere, basically. I packed light but smart, tent, compact sleeping bag, small stove, water filter, headlamp, knife, book, and a few meals. I knew there wouldn't be any cell service once I got a few miles in. That was part of the point. It took me most of the afternoon to reach the spot. The hike in was tough in parts. Some downed trees, faint game trails, nothing marked. But it felt good to move, quiet. I didn't see anyone else the whole way, no boot prints, no voices, nothing. Just leaves. And the occasional squirrel crashing through brush like it owed somebody money. The clearing itself was almost too perfect. Flat ground, soft pine bed, small fire ring. Someone must have built a long time ago. Moss-covered rocks in a half circle around the edge. It felt like nobody had touched it in years. That first night was easy. I built a tiny fire, heated up one of those foil dinners, and watched the sky get darker between the tree branches. No weird sounds, no animals creeping close. I turned in early, lay in my tent listening to the wind push through the trees. I think I was asleep before 9. I woke with the sun and unzipped the tent to this soft, golden light spilling through the trees. It was dead quiet, except for the occasional woodpecker hammering somewhere off to the left. My legs were a little sore from the hike, but in a good way. I made coffee with the little camp stove, stretched out on a rock, and watched steam rise from the mug. Around mid-morning, I decided to hike out to a ridge I'd noticed on the topo map. It was another couple of miles from camp, steeper terrain, but I figured I had time. It ended up being worth it, narrow trail, but it opened up to a view straight down to the river below. No houses, no boats, no roads, just trees and water and sky. I stayed there for maybe 2 hours, read a little, wrote in my journal, mostly dumb stuff. I remember thinking I hadn't seen a single person since leaving the car, not even far off. Not a voice, not a distant echo. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. It was mid-afternoon when I headed back. And that's when things started feeling off. When I stepped into the clearing, I stopped. My tent flap was open. Not all the way, just halfway. Like someone had started to unzip it, then decided against it. The flap was rolled slightly like someone had touched it. I stood there for a long second just looking at it, trying to remember if I'd left it that way, but I know I didn't. I'm not careful with that stuff, especially not in tick country. And it hadn't been windy. I checked the inside. Nothing was missing. My gear was exactly how I'd left it. My sleeping bag was still zipped. My food was sealed. But it didn't feel right. It felt like someone had been there. I didn't start a fire that night. Didn't want the light. Instead, I got into the tent early and read by headlamp, my knife within reach. I kept pausing to listen. Every little shift outside made my chest tighten. But there was nothing. No animals, no wind, just stillness. Then around 9, I heard something. One footstep, just one. It wasn't an animal. I've heard plenty of deer and raccoons crashing around in the woods. They're loud, erratic. This was clean. One deliberate step on pine needles, maybe 15 feet from the tent. That soft crunch, unmistakable, and then nothing. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Just lay there straining to hear something else. A second step, a cough, anything. But there was only silence. Eventually I convinced myself it could have been a branch falling or my own mind. I must have stayed awake another hour before I finally fell asleep. Next morning I opened the tent, and there was a stone, flat, smooth, light gray, placed right at the entrance where I would have stepped on it getting out. It hadn't been there before. It was too centered, too clean. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked it up and threw it as far as I could into the woods. I packed up fast. No breakfast. No second thoughts. I was supposed to stay another night, but my gut had already decided. I wanted out of those woods. About a mile into the hike back, I saw something I couldn't explain. Off to the side of the trail, maybe 30 feet in, was a structure. Just a lean-to made of thin branches, leaves, bark slabs, built low against a boulder like a crude little hut, not large enough to stand in. And here's what shook me. It hadn't been there on my way in. I was certain of that. The trail passed close enough that I would have seen it. There's no way I missed it. I stepped off the path and crept closer. Right in front of the lean-to, on a square of moss, was a pattern made of bones. Tiny ones, maybe rabbit or squirrel, clean, arranged in careful lines and angles, some kind of a symbol or maybe just decoration, I don't know. But they weren't scattered. They were placed. My stomach dropped. I didn't get any closer, just turned and walked fast back to the trail, my pulse ticking up. The rest of the hike was dead quiet. No birds, no breeze, nothing moving. When I finally reached the car, I practically threw my gear into the trunk and slammed it shut. I stood there for a second scanning the woods, expecting someone to step out. No one did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me walk away. Back home, I tried to brush it off. I told myself someone else had been camping nearby, maybe a hunter or someone doing weird survivalist stuff. The bones could have been a prank. My cousin Adam had been trying to get me into backcountry camping for a while. I'd always dodged it, said I was too busy or didn't have the right gear, which was partly true, but mostly it was just that the idea of being miles away from everything never really appealed to me the way it did to him. I liked the idea of nature more than I liked the reality of it. But that year, I don't know, I guess I just gave in. Life was loud, work was draining. I figured a few quiet days off-grid it might help reset my head. We picked a weekend in early October right after the last wave of leaf peepers and before the hunters really started showing up. Adam knew a place out in Shaver Hollow, deep in George Washington National Forest. No marked trails, no shelters, just pure off-the-map wilderness. He'd been out there once before years ago, but only for a day hike. The plan this time was 2 nights, 3 days, totally off-trail. We parked at the end of a dirt road that barely counted as drivable and set off with our packs, boots, and a printout of the topographic map. The first day was mostly hiking. We moved slow, cutting through the brush, stopping every hour or so to adjust gear or drink water. We passed over 2 ridges, 1 stream, and what looked like an old rock wall, maybe from some long abandoned property line. Around late afternoon, we found a decent clearing near a shallow creek. It was maybe 20 feet across, mostly flat, with enough space between the trees for our tents. No sign anyone else had camped there recently. No trash, no fire ring, no markings. Just a clean, empty spot tucked out of sight. That first night was uneventful in a good way. The sound of the creek made it easy to relax. I fell asleep early, actually. Didn't even stay up for the stars. The next morning after breakfast, Adam decided he wanted to try fishing up the stream. I wasn't in the mood to sit still, so I figured I'd explore a bit. There was a ridge line to the west that looked like it might offer a view, so I grabbed my water bottle and headed out solo, just to stretch my legs. It took maybe an hour to reach the top. Nothing too strenuous, but the terrain got messy. Thick underbrush, uneven rocks, spots where it felt like the ground dipped without warning. I followed a deer trail for a while, but even that vanished eventually. Just trees and more trees. That's when I saw the first cairn. Just off the path, if you could call it that, right in the middle of a half-cleared patch. 6 stones stacked with real care. Balanced perfectly, too. At first, I didn't think much of it. Hikers leave those sometimes to mark the way, but this one was odd. The rocks were wrong for the area. Pale gray, almost white, worn smooth like river stones. We were on a slope, far from any water that would have shaped them like that. They didn't belong still. I didn't touch it. Just noted it and moved on. Then 10 minutes later I saw another one. Smaller, leaning slightly, but the same type of stones. This one was sitting in a little hollow surrounded by pine needles and half-rotted logs. I started feeling uneasy. I told myself maybe Adam had built them on his last trip just messing around. But he would have said something. And even if he had, what were the odds I'd find them that easily, that far apart? I kept going for another few minutes. Found a third one. This one collapsed, with 2 of the stones cracked and moss-covered, tucked beside a tree that looked like it had been struck by lightning years ago. Its trunk had split in this jagged, unnatural way, like something had forced it apart. I stood there for a long time, not really thinking about anything, just staring at it. That's when I realized how quiet the woods had gotten. No birds, no wind, not even the distant trickle of the creek. I hadn't even noticed it fade out. It just wasn't there anymore. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I turned around and started heading back. When I got back to camp, Adam was crouched by the fire pit, poking at it with a stick. He asked how the ridge was, and I said it was fine. I didn't bring up the cairns. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to spook him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe it wasn't weird. We made dinner and settled in for the evening. That's when we noticed things weren't the same. The fire ring we'd built was slightly off. Stones shifted like someone had taken it apart and rebuilt it without really understanding the layout. Adam's fishing rod, which he'd left leaning against a tree, was lying on the far side of camp facing downhill. And my tarp, one of those lightweight nylon covers I'd tied between trees for rain, had a long, ragged tear down the middle. It wasn't clean. It looked like it had caught on something sharp and been pulled. We both stood there staring at it. Adam asked if maybe it was a bear. I said maybe, but we both knew it didn't make sense. Bears don't move gear around, they don't stack stones, and they don't do it all without leaving prints. We talked about hiking out, but it was already getting dark. We decided to stay one more night, stick together, keep our knives close. We had a flare gun. We figured whoever or whatever was out there probably wasn't coming back. We were wrong. I crawled into my tent around 9. Lay there for a while listening, nothing. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking up with this strange awareness that something was off. I wasn't sure why at first, then I heard it. Leaves crunching. Slowly. One step. Pause. Another step. They were moving in a wide arc around our camp. Not fast, not quiet either, just casual, like someone walking deliberately, not caring if they were heard. My heart started pounding. I didn't move, just lay there, eyes wide open, hand gripping the handle of my knife inside the bag. I kept waiting for a flashlight beam, a cough, and a voice. Nothing. Then something touched my tent, right near my head. Just a light pressure, like a hand pressing gently against the nylon, not pushing in, just resting there. Fingers, maybe. I stopped breathing. It stayed like that for what felt like forever. Then the pressure moved, slid downward, across the wall of the tent. Then it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there frozen until the sky started getting light. When I finally unzipped my tent, Adam was already up. He looked pale. He wasn't talking, just rolling up his sleeping bag, stuffing things into his pack like it was a fire drill. His tent had a long slash down one side, same kind of tear mine had, but lower, near where his torso would have been while sleeping. He said he hadn't heard anything. We didn't eat, didn't even boil water. We just packed up and left. About an hour into the hike, we saw something hanging from a branch over the trail. It was my bootlace, one I'd used to secure my tarp. Someone had taken it and braided it into this strange little knot. 3 loops, one long tail, all pulled tight and left dangling like a charm. It wasn't just weird, it felt deliberate, like a message. Adam saw it too. We didn't stop, didn't touch it, we just kept walking. By the time we got to the gravel access road, my legs felt like rubber. We sat in the car for a few minutes, not saying anything. Then Adam started the engine and we drove back to his place in total silence. I didn't sleep well for the next couple nights. That was 3 years ago. I haven't camped since. I was 22 when I went camping with my cousin Michael in the eastern part of the Appalachians. He was 23, lived a couple counties over, and had grown up with these hills practically in his backyard. Out of nowhere, he texted me one evening with this idea about getting away for a few days. Said backcountry camping had helped him when things got heavy in his own life. Told me the solitude might clear my head. I didn't have a better plan, so I said yes. We met up just after sunrise, threw our gear into his beat-up SUV, and drove for hours on back roads. Eventually we ditched pavement for gravel and then gravel for dirt. He kept saying things like, "Almost there, and you're going to love this spot." But I noticed there wasn't a trailhead or parking lot in sight. We left the car behind a row of trees and started hiking. Michael led the way, cutting through brush and ducking under branches like he'd done it 100 times. I just followed, hoping I wouldn't twist an ankle. He said the place we were going wasn't marked on any park maps. He and a buddy had found it years back while trying to escape some crowded trailheads. You had to go past a dried creek bed, then keep left after a collapsed section of logging road. It felt less like a hiking route and more like following someone's memory. But I didn't question it. The way he talked about the place like it was a secret he only shared with people he trusted. It felt wrong to interrupt. By late afternoon, we set up camp at the edge of the stone ridge, surrounded by dense trees and uneven forest floor. The spot was beautiful in that wild, untouched kind of way. No old campfire rings, no beer cans, no boot prints. If anyone had stayed there before, it had been a long time ago. Michael got a fire going while I unpacked. I remember sitting on a log, looking around and realizing how quiet it was. No distant traffic, no planes overhead. Even the birds weren't making much noise. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, something about it made my skin crawl. That night I couldn't sleep. Michael was out cold as soon as he hit his sleeping bag, but I lay there staring at the roof of the tent, listening. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the random noises you get in the woods, like branches settling or leaves shifting. Actual steps. Slow, measured, circling our tent in a deliberate pattern. I held my breath and listened hard. Whatever it was wasn't heavy like a bear. It wasn't stomping around. The steps were light but careful, like someone trying to stay quiet and just failing by a little. Michael didn't stir. I remember glancing over and seeing his silhouette, motionless, breathing steady. I didn't move either. Didn't even reach for the flashlight. I just lay there listening, every muscle locked up. I kept waiting for the sound to start again, or to stop completely. Eventually it faded and the forest went quiet again. I must have dozed off after that because the next thing I remember it was morning and the tent was glowing with sunlight. Michael was already up, boiling water over the fire like nothing had happened. I thought about telling him what I'd heard, but stopped myself. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it had just been a deer or wind shifting something around. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I kept quiet. That day we went deeper into the forest, following a ridge that dipped into this overgrown basin. The trail was barely there, and most of the time we were just moving through thick brush. There were these weird ferns everywhere, darker than normal, almost black in the shadows. The trees were tall and gnarled, and nothing looked like it had grown in the right direction. It was dead quiet again. No birds, no rustling, not even bugs. Then we found the structure. It was this short, rounded stone building tucked against a slope about 10 feet tall, partially collapsed, completely overgrown with moss, definitely man-made. Too small to live in. Maybe a root cellar or an old smokehouse. Michael's eyes lit up when he saw it. He wanted to check it out right away. I said no. Something about it just felt wrong. The air around it was colder, like we walked into a refrigerator. And there was this smell, sharp and metallic, like wet coins mixed with rot. Not the kind of rot you get from a dead animal, something else. He went in anyway. Told me to stay put, which I was more than happy to do. I stood back and watched the doorway, counting the seconds. He was inside for maybe 20. When he came out, he looked pale, shaken, like he'd seen something he couldn't explain. I asked what was in there, and at first he just said bones. I thought he meant animal bones, but then he added they were big. Too big to be deer. Flat teeth. And one of the skulls, someone bored a hole right through the center. We didn't talk much after that. Hiked back to camp, mostly in silence. Michael wasn't joking around like earlier. He didn't poke at the fire or mess with his gear like he usually did. That night he barely touched his food. I asked him again what else he saw in the stone hut. He looked at me for a long second, then just said, "I don't think we should have come out here." That night I heard footsteps again. This time they didn't just circle the tent, they stopped right outside. Then the zipper started to move. Slowly. Just a few inches. Not enough to open the flap fully, but enough that I could hear the nylon shifting. I reached out toward my flashlight, and that's when Michael grabbed my wrist. Hard. He was awake, breathing fast, shallow. We didn't speak, we didn't move, we just listened. The zipper closed again, and then everything went quiet. We didn't wait for sunlight. As soon as it was bright enough to see, we started packing. No fire, no breakfast. We left behind anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Michael didn't speak the whole time, just kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something to be standing there. On the way out, I asked him again what he saw in that stone building. He said there were carvings, symbols burned into the wooden beams, letters or shapes he didn't recognize, and something on the wall, a photo. Water damaged, curling from moisture but still visible. Faces. And one of them, he swore, looked like our grandmother when she was young. We kept walking, hoping to make it out before dark. But something was wrong. The trail didn't line up the way it should have. The dry creek bed? Gone. Or maybe we passed another one that looked exactly like it. Landmarks started to blur together. It didn't feel like we were retracing our steps. It felt like the forest was shifting. We had to stop and set up camp again. That night was worse. Sometime around midnight, I woke up to this sound. Low rhythmic chanting coming from deep in the trees. A voice steady and fast, saying something I couldn't understand. It wasn't English, it wasn't any language I'd ever heard. Just syllables, looping over and over. Too fast to process. Michael sat bolt upright. "We're leaving," he whispered. "Now." We didn't argue, didn't plan. Just grabbed our packs, flicked on the headlamps, and started walking. For hours we moved through the dark. The chanting got quieter, but it didn't stop until we were almost back to the logging road. By the time we hit the highway, the sun was coming up. That was the last time I saw Michael. 3 days later, he drove his truck off a ravine along Route 17. The official report said he'd been drinking and fell asleep at the wheel. But Michael didn't drink, not even at family parties. And he wasn't heading home. He was miles off his usual route, heading back toward the forest. After the funeral, I started getting calls from his number. No voice, just silence. Sometimes there was a sound, soft shuffling, like someone adjusting in a tight space. I blocked the number. Then the voicemail started. 3 in total. The first 2 were just empty. The third had breathing slow, deep, right up against the mic. I changed my number. I packed a bag and left town. I'm writing this from a motel 2 states over. I'm not sure where I'm going next, but it won't be anywhere with walls that close me in. And I haven't camped since. Well, after all that, I think I'll stick to camping in my living room, where the only thing I have to worry about is a rogue Lego underfoot. If you're safely tucked away in a house with real walls, hit that like button, share this with a friend you want to scare, and subscribe for more. It's way safer than the woods, I promise.